Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a topic that affects all of us here in Taiwan. Why does our society sometimes feel, well, a bit irrational? We're going to use the powerful ideas from Rolf Dobelli's book, The Art of Thinking Clearly, as our guide to figure it all out. So let's just jump right in with the big question. Have you ever looked at the news or a debate online and just thought to yourself, why do we keep falling into the same traps? It feels like we're stuck in a loop, repeating the same mistakes. So why does this keep happening? You can see the signs of this irrationality pretty much everywhere. And we're not just talking about a few people making bad choices. We're talking about these huge society-wide challenges that just seem to stick around no matter what we do. Now, when you analyze what's going on in Taiwan right now, these challenges really seem to boil down to three main areas. First, there's this growing lack of trust in our political systems. Then you have these constant lurking risks in our economy. And finally, we face these really tough dilemmas about how we manage the resources we all share. So where does all this come from? Well, what's so fascinating is that it might not be about bad people or bad intentions. The argument is that the real root cause is something much deeper. Predictable, systematic errors in how our brains are actually built. In his book, Rolf Dobelli calls these cognitive biases, and a great way to think about them is as mental shortcuts. Our brains are lazy, they want to save energy, but in the super complex world we live in today, these shortcuts often backfire, leading us down the wrong path in very predictable ways. And these aren't just random glitches, they're actually old features from our evolutionary past. Think about something called the action bias. Imagine you're one of our ancestors. You hear a rustle in the grass. Is it the wind or a saber-toothed tiger? The person who runs first, without thinking, is the one who survives. Great for the savannah, but not so great when you're managing your stock portfolio. And here's a perfect and kind of funny example of a bias called the overconfidence effect. We are all programmed to overestimate what we know and what we can do. Get this. One survey found that 84% of French men said their skills in the bedroom are above average, which, that's just mathematically impossible, right? The average has to be 50%. Now, if you had to pick the most important bias of all, this would be it. Dobelli actually calls confirmation bias the father of all thinking errors. It's basically our brain acting like a bouncer at a club. It only lets in information that confirms what we already believe, and it kicks everything else to the curb. What's just so incredible about this is that even one of the greatest thinkers in history, Charles Darwin, knew how powerful this bias was. He was so worried about it that he created a system to fight it. He forced himself to immediately write down any piece of evidence that went against his theories, just so he couldn't forget or ignore it. Okay, here's another huge one, loss aversion. This chart shows it perfectly. Researchers have found that the pain you feel from losing $100 is psychologically about twice as strong as the happiness you feel from gaining $100. We are hardwired to avoid losses at all costs. All right, so we've got the theory down. Now let's bring it home. Let's see how these little mental glitches play out in the real world, right here in Taiwan's political landscape. This is where it gets really interesting. The political division in Taiwan today isn't just about people disagreeing on policies. The analysis suggests it's become something much deeper. It's an emotional, almost tribal hostility between the blue and green identities. It's less about what you believe and more about which side you're on. And this whole situation is basically a perfect storm of cognitive biases. Confirmation bias makes us seek out news that tells us we're right. Social media creates these echo chambers where we only hear our own views repeated back to us. Social proof pushes us to agree with our group, and authority bias makes us trust our favorite politicians without question. Put it all together, and real, rational debate becomes almost impossible. And here's the really crucial part. This isn't just happening by accident. There are outside forces that understand these biases perfectly. They use them as weapons in what's called cognitive warfare, spreading disinformation and fake news designed specifically to trigger our biases, create chaos, and wear down our trust in everything. Of course, these thinking traps don't just stop at politics. They have a huge, huge impact on our finances and on how we manage the resources that we're all supposed to share as a society. The stock market is practically a playground for cognitive biases. You've got the overconfidence effect, making people think they can time the market. You have loss aversion, causing us to hold on to a losing stock way too long, just because selling it would mean admitting we made a mistake. And then there's the classic sunk cost fallacy, that feeling of, well, I've already invested so much, I can't back out now, even when it's clearly a bad idea. And this same logic applies to public resources. Let's take Taiwan's amazing national health insurance system. On an individual level, it makes sense to get the most out of it. But if everyone takes just a little bit more than they need, the whole system gets strained and could eventually collapse for everyone. It's a textbook case of the tragedy of the commons.
Okay, so after hearing all of this, you might be feeling a little pessimistic. I get it. If our brains are just wired this way, are we totally stuck? What can we possibly do to start making smarter, more rational decisions together?
Well, here's the good news. The solution isn't to just try harder. Willpower alone is never going to be enough to overcome these biases. The real answer is to be smarter about the systems we create. It's an idea called de-biasing design. Basically, building systems that act as guardrails against our worst mental habits. This table gives us a kind of roadmap. You can see how for each big problem area, you first identify the main biases causing the trouble. Then, you design a strategy to counter them. So, for financial risk, instead of just telling yourself not to be emotional, you could set up an automatic stop-loss rule that sells a stock for you. You take the flawed human brain out of the loop. So, what can we start doing right now? Here are 2 really practical steps. First, be like Darwin. Make it a habit to actively look for proof that you're wrong. It feels weird, but it's incredibly powerful. Second, when you see a big success, don't just admire it. Do what's called an alternative path analysis. Think about all the other ways that same decision could have led to total disaster. It gives you a much more realistic view of risk. In the end, just becoming aware of these thinking traps is the most important first step. It gives you a new lens to see the world and to understand yourself. And that leaves us with one final big question to think about in our own lives. Now that we know all this, how can we start to change our conversations?